And the mistake that some games masters make, and leaders and communicators, is that they dominate the conversation. And that is one of the worst things that you can do. And I've played in games like that, and everyone's sitting around the table twiddling their thumbs by one person showboating. And you're like, just make some space for everybody else.
Hello, and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abbie, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Tom Watkin as we take a communication perspective on practicing leadership through playing Dungeons and Dragons. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we embody curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Tom Watkin. Tom is a passionate business leader and a writer who bridges the imaginative world of Dungeons and Dragons with real-world leadership in his blog, D&D at Work. In addition to that, he's a business leader in the environmental sector with experience across Australia, Europe, New Zealand, and Asia. He's also the author of Business Development Begins Here, a book I realized we didn't even get to touch on in this conversation because I was so enthralled with the conversation we were having about Dungeons and Dragons, but it certainly all ties together, so I'd encourage you to go check that out. This is a conversation that I am so excited about and so grateful for the way it came together. A lot of the conversations I have are in the works for a while, maybe people I've had my eye on, known that I've wanted them to be on my podcast for months or a year, maybe have reached out a couple times, been paying attention to their work. Tom came to this podcast a little differently in that, as you will hear in just a moment, I kind of has started to think about Dungeons and Dragons as a really beautiful metaphor and example of so many CMM-ish ideas. And then I started wondering if anyone else was talking about Dungeons and Dragons as a great learning tool and found Tom. I messaged him, he messaged back, and voila, this conversation happened very recently and in a very, very emergent way. So it's beautiful that the coming together of this podcast itself is a testament to that as well. This is a great conversation, whether you are familiar with, care about, know about Dungeons and Dragons at all or not. I hope you won't get too lost. I don't think there's too much jargon to overwhelm you. But again, like I say at the top of every episode, but especially true for today, whether you are familiar with this topic or not, the hope, and I do think the reality of this conversation is that because we are using a communication perspective, it will reveal important things for all of us. There's something to learn for all of us here. So I invite you to join this conversation with myself and Tom, and let's jump right into it. Hi, Tom. Thanks so much for joining the podcast today.
Hi, Abbie. Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for accepting the invite. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you. And like I always do, want to start us off with the question of how are we both arriving today? Help us set some context for the conversation we're about to have. And I will start us off to set the largest level of context for this conversation, which is to talk about how I came to know and have a love for the game Dungeons and Dragons. A little bit of an unconventional path into that is that I started watching a show called Dimension 20 on Dropout TV, a great streaming service I'm happy to do a little plug for right now. And I was into that because it was a bunch of comedians who I liked other work that they were doing. And I really had no experience with Dungeons and Dragons, but had kind of watched everything else from this group. And so it was just like, I'll just watch, maybe I'll be entertained. I really never looked back. And that just like immediately kind of struck me as this really beautiful setup. It's like, watching a TV show, but you're watching the people create the story in this moment. And so I imagine that not everyone listening has a deep understanding of what Dungeons and Dragons is. So let's get into that in a moment. But this is just a testament to how I cannot keep CMM and my communication perspective out of the other areas of my life, even when I'm not working, because I was just watching this show and have started to play this game myself and have really come to realize what a great opportunity it offers for people to practice all the things that we talk about in CMM in terms of collaborating and storytelling and meaning making together in a very improvisational way. So all of that interest is what led me to reach out to you. I'm so excited to learn from you, so excited to explore this together. So that's how I'm arriving with all of that energy, all that excitement, all that curiosity. Tom, how are you arriving?
So I'm arriving. We've just had a long weekend here in Australia, or at least in Western Australia. So I've had a long weekend of relaxing, doing loads of stuff with the family, and actually playing D&D. I organized a
Nice.
game for my friend's birthday. So we had a Star Wars themed game, which was completely chaotic and great fun. But yeah, I'm nicely rested. I'm really excited about this discussion. I love talking about D&D in other contexts other than just the
Mhm.
game. So yeah, can't wait to get to it.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, like I said, I'd love for you to introduce D&D to us for those people who don't know, but to start, can you introduce yourself and kind of self-select for us? What do you want us to know about you as we go into this conversation today?
Sure. So my name's Tom Watkin. I'm from Scotland originally, but I live in Western Australia. I've been a leader in the environment sector for over 20 years, and I've been playing D&D for a lot longer than that, of course. And a few years ago, I was sitting in a meeting, facilitating a meeting, and it must have been shortly after having played a game of D&D at the previous weekend and going around and facilitating the meeting for people, trying to make sure everyone's getting a chance to talk. It suddenly struck me that there were these great similarities between playing the game of Dungeons and Dragons and facilitating a meeting and
Mhm.
leading. And I suddenly saw all these parallels and thought, right, I want to explore this a little bit more. So that's when I started my blog, which is Dungeons and Dragons at Work, where I look at those similarities between leadership and the softer skills like communication, things that you aren't really taught when you go through university.
Mhm.
I was the parallels between that and the game and how the two interrelate. And I've been exploring that ever since.
Yeah, yeah. What would you say is a good introduction? How would you describe Dungeons and Dragons for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, it's always a tricky one to describe,
Mhm.
but in a nutshell, it's a game where you're creating a story together. So you sit around a table. It can be played online, but to my mind, actually sitting around a physical table with people is there's something magical about that and something that's we don't do all that much in today's society. So you sit around a table, you have one person, the dungeon master or the games master facilitating the game. They've set up an adventure or a scenario, and the other people around the table, the players, they take on different characters who have got very special skills and very unique skills, and they play. So if we're looking at it in the context of Dungeons and Dragons, typically it's a bit like Lord of the Rings. So a lot of listeners will understand and seen the Lord of the Rings movies. So you have people playing elves, wizards, knights, that sort of thing. And then together you have to work against challenges and overcome problems and obstacles. And together you create this story of how the characters are overcoming these obstacles and basically going on adventures, saving the world, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And it becomes a really exciting once you get into it, anything's possible. And as you're sharing, like and collaborating on the story, stories can take all sorts of wonderful twists and turns that if you weren't playing together, there's no way that would happen. So it's that sort of shared storytelling that comes out of it, and then the game just sets a framework to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. What do you remember about your first introduction to Dungeons and Dragons and why it kind of spoke to you?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I was quite young when I was introduced to it. So my dad had been he worked on the oil rigs in Scotland, and he'd been playing with his friends on the oil rigs, which sounds a bit unusual to me, but he brought it back. Must have been about 8, maybe a little bit younger, and we were sitting in front of the fire in our house. It was lived in Scotland, and it was really cold outside, and dark, and we were playing in front of the fire, my brother and my mum and I, and my dad was running the game. And I think I must have been getting into The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings at that point. And it just blew my mind that you could create these stories where you as the hero and your friends could do almost anything and take the adventure any way you want. It's just sort of sharing this like fantastical world. Yeah, it really blew my mind. And luckily for me, some friends of mine were into it, or sort of got into it through me, and yeah, we played for quite a long time after that. I suppose for me as an 8-year-old, it was that possibility of just having these adventures like Lord of the Rings, but they're your own, and you're creating them at the table. Yeah, I don't think I've ever lost that sense of wonder about the game.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I'm very aware that my introduction to it is very unconventional in terms of watching people play it and falling in love with it before I'd even played it. And I think what sticks out to me about why I have there, there's a lot of seasons of the show that I've watched, and I've watched many of them, and I kind of just like crave them because there is something really beautiful about this kind of storytelling and the way it unfolds, and you get to be a part of that if you are a player, even more so, but also me watching this.
Mm.
And I think about moments, maybe more recently, I was watching an episode towards like the end of a season, a campaign, and I'm like tearing up over here as something kind of like, in this storyline, it's like really coming together, or they're facing something. And I just kind of remember this like coming out of my own body, looking at myself being like, how am I crying over this game right now? But there is that real emotion to it. And I think that, from my understanding, is maybe part of what you see in this game, and why there's things to pull out of it that are valuable in other contexts, because it's real in a lot of ways, and it offers an opportunity to practice. So what do you have to say about what role playing can teach us?
Well, first of all, on the emotional front, when you're playing a game like this, and the group I play with at the moment, myself and quite a few of the players have been playing together for years now. And when something dramatic happens, like a character dies, like a really loved character dies, it can be, it can really pull on the heartstrings, and you have that sort of shared moment of like,
Yeah.
oh no, what are we going to do? So that emotion's very real. The other thing is, there's a book by Jennifer Uliet called Me, Myself, and Why. And she describes the memories that you create when you're playing games like this. Your memory remembers them as being real. I mean, I know you can distinguish between the two, right? But you remember them as being real. So there's a great opportunity for using the game to create experiences that are technically lived experiences in your memory. I think there's a lot of use there. So, for example, in leadership training, one of the best leadership trainings I did years ago, we were thrown into role-playing situations with actors and things, and that absolutely, again, it blew me away. I mean, I was already into D&D, but to actually do it in a corporate setting, I was like, this is amazing, and it really gave me the confidence to go and lead teams in the real world. I think playing games like D&D lets you explore a lot of those things, like whether it's communication. Well, communication is a big one, and I'll come to that one in a second. But other things like leadership styles. I played a game where someone was the captain of a spaceship, and they decided to go all dictatorial, and it's like
Yeah.
Captain Bligh of the Bounty type thing, and the whole crew mutinied, which wasn't part of the story, but we all, the rest of the players mutinied because he was being such a terrible leader. But doing that and having fun with it can let you really explore different styles of leadership, different styles of communication, and then you remember them as being real, and that can then prepare you for the workplace, or organizational leadership, or if you're having to do tricky communication or negotiation, you can practice all these things within the game. I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious if you have any other stories or experiences that are coming to you as you think about this difference between, someone telling you, hey, do this, this, and this to be a good leader, versus in a scenario like a Dungeons and
Mm,
Dragons game, actually getting to practice it in a way that, like you're saying, feels like real experience.
exactly. So as having gone through, like, I did my MBA, and I've done quite a lot of leadership training, and you never get, that's the bit that's missing.
Hmm.
Apart from that one exception I was talking about before, generally you have you get given the theory, you get given some case studies, and you work through them, and you go, okay, great. Now I've got to take it into the real world. But
Hmm.
if you could play a game like Dungeons and Dragons, at the end of one of these like modules, you have a scenario and you're as a team you're working together. Perhaps you take it in turns to be the leader in different scenarios. You can actually practice this stuff and see what works for you and what doesn't, and it gives you an opportunity to explore your communication style, your preferred style of communication, as well as your leadership style, and just get a feel for it without having to be in a real team in the real world and with that stress of potentially messing it up.
Hmm.
And that removing that stress and having a safe place to play, I think, is a great tool that isn't really being utilized at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, I think that matters a lot, and it makes me think of we have another podcast from the CMM Institute that's called Cosmo
Mm.
Parenting, and so this whole
Oh, right.
year we're going through 12 different themes as they relate to parenting.
Right.
And we'd previously done a theme of relationship, which it's all about relationships, but we kind of
Mm.
focused one month on relationships and what are relationships. Relationships are co-created and everything is related. And so just, getting people to think differently about how they create their relationships, how they contribute along with the other person or the other people.
Mm.
And the last episode of that month, with a woman named Nana Bonsu, she offered this great language of relationships as rehearsals, especially in like a parent-child relationship we were talking about, that you as a parent can kind of model and offer an opportunity for your child to learn how to relate to people so that when they go out into other relationships in their life, they've, had an opportunity to quote unquote rehearse with you or within the family and begin to understand as a child, which just as many adults are still learning this, but children helping them understand how they co-create the relationships that they're in. And so I think this idea of rehearsals, of practicing, of playing around, trying things out, like getting to be in safe spaces to do that is actually so important for our communication,
Mm.
because I think it is just experientially that's the best kind of learning we can do, to begin to in the everyday moments of our lives make those connections of, okay, I did this and this person responded this way, or we created this together, and what could we have made differently if we had shown up differently. And then you get to kind of try different things on, and that's going to be, I think, so much more valuable than someone talking at you and saying try these things, instead you actually getting to do them for yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We're in complete agreement there.
Yeah, yeah. What else do you articulate in terms of what are the specific things you feel like we can learn from D&D?
Well, there's an interesting concept, or if you think about Dungeons and Dragons, it's in everyone's imagination. So I was thinking about communication. So as the dungeon master or the games master, you're running the game, the five people around the table opposite you are all imagining it slightly differently,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
to be honest, when I'm playing, I don't normally think about that and just get on with it. But it does mean that when you're communicating, you have to be as clear as possible. And I've made this mistake before. You leave a little bit of ambiguity, and people then latch on to different things. You say a sentence, people latch on to different parts of it,
Mm-hmm.
and suddenly you've got four people all thinking completely different things.
Yeah.
So when you're playing, I've really had to hone my communication style and make sure I'm being really clear about what's what. Sometimes you have to use visual aids. So if there's a particularly important a non-player character like a villain or something, it's quite good to have a picture of them so everyone can get a shared idea of what they're like. I've made a mistake where I've described a character and then 2 sessions later produced a picture. And of course, everyone's imagined them differently, and that went down
Yes.
really badly. So I never do that again.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's that whole really honing your communication, I think, is really important with Dungeons and Dragons. The other aspect, which is I think really great, and we've talked about this off air, is the improvisation side. So as a leader, I get ambushed fairly regularly, where you have staff members having issues that you have no idea about, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this issue's happened. What are we going to do?" Sort of like
Yeah.
a deer in headlights and
Yes.
panic. being able to improvise and think on the fly is such a useful skill, not only in leadership, but in life in general,
Mm-hmm.
so you can, when things sort of blindside you, you can take a step back and deal with them. It's also a lot of fun. So with what I've learned is in D&D is rather than creating adventures that are very set in stone about what's going to happen, we're going to get from point A to B, and then we're going to fight the dragon, and on and on and on. Instead, you create a little bit more like a sandbox where there are a few
Mm-hmm.
elements, you know what's going on. Maybe there's a village here, there's a few different characters and factions, and then you just give the players free rein. You say,
Mm-hmm.
right, let's see what happens. And that you have to then respond to what they're doing, they respond to what you're doing. And it actually you can end up creating these beautiful stories that there's no way I would have come up with them on my own. And so being able to practice that improvisation, whether you're running the game or playing the game, is such a useful thing to be able to do. So as a player, I always encourage my players, and when I play as well, is to sort of take people's ideas and you sort of build on them, and you sort of create things idea and you support each other. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, so I've had games where I had it planned out. For example, I had it planned out that there was going to be a civil war in this island chain, and the characters were going to get embroiled with it. And instead, we went off on a big piratical adventure that spanned the globe, and they saved the world from a whole load of demons. And there's no way I would have come up with the intricacies or the excitement of that plot on my own, but we did
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
like six of us together. We created something really beautiful, and that was all through that in improvisation and allowing people that play to emerge and allowing that story to emerge. And I think that's useful from a communication point of view because
Yep.
when you're giving a talk or you're facilitating a meeting, particularly when you're facilitating a meeting, you've got someone who just gets up and talks at you and tells you everything. And you're like, oh, right, okay, I don't know why I'm here. Whereas when you're at a meeting and people are like asking you your ideas and you're sort of all collaborating, there's a real energy and you come out with some brilliant outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a real link there to be explored.
I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but I just think that Dungeons and Dragons is a perfect metaphor or analogy for exactly what CMM is trying to talk about and exactly what we hope for our relationships and our I know world building is like
Mm,
a term in games and games like D&D, and that's kind of language that we use for real life communication. We say that we construct our social worlds through our communication. And so exactly what you've named here is again a couple different of these like keywords of CMM. I could like connect
right.
to specific things within the game, and it's CMM, coordinated management of meaning. That coordinating is exactly what you're doing when you've said, oh, people have heard me differently, or people are taking different meaning out of what I as the game master have said, and we have to coordinate that together. And that's a collaborative thing to do. And it is often improvisational and emergent, just to throw all of these CMM-ish words at you. But these are the kind of ideas that I, reflect on a lot and am looking out for in the world. And that practice just, yeah, I'm struck by how important that real practice of it is, because I think improv is very scary for people,
Mm,
and maybe would be less scary if they started to see so much of what every day, every conversation is improvisational to some extent, so if we let ourselves believe we were good at it, I think we would maybe feel a little differently. But I think something like role playing, something like D&D is maybe scary at first to people that haven't had experiences like that, because there is a element of, I think a lot of us carry with us a kind of perfectionism
mm.
and
Yeah.
kind of, I don't mean productivity, but focus on the product. And what you're saying is that the real value here is in the process. And you can't rush
Yeah.
that, and you can't you can't control it to every extent. And so you have to leave room for the emergence of other characters, other players, and their perspectives, as well as the element of mystery, another important CMM word, when you have the element of, in D&D, rolling the dice, because maybe you've given a great, really impassioned speech and then you rolled really poorly on your persuasion check, and so it didn't work. And that's what the dice said. And so I think that in and of itself is such a great metaphor for what our real communication in our real lives are like. You can make all the choices you make and you can be as thoughtful as you want. And there's still an element of mystery every single time. And so it's about how do we enter into that and how do we adapt and improvise in those kind of situations.
Yeah, I think that you bring a good point there with the dice adding a real element of chaos.
Yeah, chaos.
And I think you need that. You need that. If you have everything, well, like you said, like in real life, you can't have everything planned out fully because something's going to come and bite you or something's going to change. And so the dice do a really good job of reflecting that.
Yeah, true in D&D and true in life as well.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I'm excited to hear more stories about experiences you've had, maybe in a workplace setting of getting to put these ideas to practice, or in your own playing of D&D. What are some moments that you'd want to share that might help people understand, again, like the power of this game for people?
So that one I was talking to you about with the captain of the spaceship, that one was an absolute cracker on how not to lead and how not
Yes.
to communicate. I've found, yeah, when I'm playing, so I played. You mentioned about parents and their children, so I played with a father and his daughter for a
Mm,
long time. They were part of our group for about 3 or 4 years, and they were doing it as a shared bonding experience between the two of them,
mm,
and they were fantastic. They really sort of bought into the story, and I think when his daughter started playing with us, she was 15. I think when she finished it, she was 19, and you could see like she got really into the story and became really confident as a person as well
mm-hmm.
with it, being
Yes.
able to stand up and give speeches. So one of her last games, and she would never have done this when she first started, right? So this is maybe 4 years, 3, 4 years in. She stood up and she sacrificed her character to protect and save the group and
Oh,
gave this like amazing speech. And you're saying it was emotional. We
yeah.
were all like, all of us were absolutely just dumbstruck. It was
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And she, when she first started, there's no way she would have stood up and walked around the room and given this amazing speech and done something heroic. It was incredible
Yeah.
to see her grow and become much more comfortable with communicating and basically making the game her own. And
Mm,
it takes time, um, but there's lots there from that. Other experiences. Well, just the first, you're saying some people might find Dungeons and Dragons a bit difficult to get into. It's quite a jump for some people. So if you join a group and you maybe join as a player, that's one thing, and that's you can ease yourself into it that way.
mm-hmm.
But I remember the first time, so I had a bit of a gap from university, and then I got into the world of work and things, and I had a bit of a gap with my D&D. When I got back into running games again, I can remember that first one, and I sat there at the end of the table, and I didn't know the people all that well, but I just took a deep breath and was like, right, let's go for it. And there's something about jumping into that uncomfortable zone and
Mm-hmm.
just giving something a crack. And my thinking was, what's the worst that can happen? They're not going to enjoy it, and I'm not going to do it again next month. But I'm not going to offend anyone.
Yeah.
You know, um, so that was, and actually, what you find is that the players want to have a good time. So it doesn't matter. You're all working together. It's not all on you
Yeah.
as an individual player or as a games master. You're actually doing it as a team. So thinking that it's all on your shoulders isn't true at all. You're
Mm-hmm.
facilitating the game, but they're all invested in making it fun too. I think that's the same with communication and leadership as well. It's not all on you as the leader. You can
Mm-hmm.
involve other team members. You can, you're all in it together. Ultimately, you all want the team to succeed,
Right.
and you're just facilitating, helping them all do that. So there's a lot of parallels there. Oh, the other thing is, yeah, when I play, I think it's very important to make sure everyone has the spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
So when you've got maybe 3 or 4 people, 5 people at the table, you have to make sure that everyone has a chance to get engaged with every scene. I do that really systematically, just going around the table one by one. But it's the same at work. And it's the same when you're communicating. If you're in a meeting or you've got a group of you discussing a project or whatever it happens to be, you have to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to get involved. If someone's staying really quiet, you've got to try and draw them in.
Hmm.
And I think you can practice that in the game. Even as a player, you can make sure if there's a slightly quieter person who may be newer to the game, there's actions you can take, get them involved, have your character talk to their character, ask them what they want to do, what their thoughts are, and
Hmm.
really draw them into the group. Don't let them, whether they're shy or whatever, don't let them just sit at the edge. Really actively include them. And it's the same, yeah, in work. It's the same with project meetings. All of these things you can practice that in the game and take those outside of the game too.
I think a great opportunity to appreciate the different way that people participate too, because even as you
Mm,
invite people in, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll look the same way. I'm thinking about the game that I'm a part of right now, which again, we've played 2 sessions of,
mm,
but it is our game master. One person who also leads other campaigns, is so very experienced, keeps pulling things up on their phone because they've got the whole manual, like know all the rules.
yeah,
When our game master is kind of pausing, this person's jumping in and be like, well, I think it's this. I'm pretty sure it's this. Me, who's very eager but has never played before. And then my partner who's played a handful of games. And it is really funny to me that kind of, not disbalance, that's not even a word, but the lack of balance in the way we're all participating is that this one friend is like asking all the questions before the game master can even get to that because they know what to be looking for. They're very practiced. I'm trying to be like really true to my character and I'm pretty
yeah,
talkative, but also, trying to figure things out. And then my partner is pretty quiet. And so what's kept happening though over the course of these 2 games is that he'll be kind of quiet. He'll be kind of quiet. So the game master, me, will kind of like invite him in. And then he just
yes.
says like the one line that's like the funniest thing, or he like takes the first turn in the battle and just like throws a fire extinguisher at someone and ends the whole combat in one turn. Like these moments where it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many different ways for us to make choices about how we engage. And they're all very valuable. And they
Mm,
all, again, contribute to this process of collaboration that doesn't just like, you take a turn, you take a turn, you say your thing, you say your thing. That's
mm.
collaboration, but really finding a way to coordinate between different ways of being together.
Definitely, and it's making sure as the players and the person and the games master that you're creating the space for everyone to be able to
Yes.
engage and however they want to do it.
Hmm.
And don't and the mistake that some games masters make and leaders and communicators
Hmm.
is that they dominate the
Yes.
conversation. And that is one of the worst things that you can do. And I've
Yeah.
played in games like that, and everyone's sitting around the table twiddling their thumbs by one person showboating, and you're like,
Yeah.
just make some space for everybody else.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so there's some real world applications there. Something you mentioned about the rules resonates with me quite strongly. So for years and years, I've never really had a good handle on the rules of D&D. So I rely on all of us as at the
Yeah.
table to determine what they are. So I think if people are worried because they see like the rule books and they're like, oh my gosh, there's maths involved with this, don't worry about it. I've run games for years
Hmm.
and never really known all the rules. I
Yep.
have to ask my players and say, "Oh, what's the rule for that?" And then they'll tell me,
Hmm.
and together we work it out. Or even if sometimes we just work it out together. So that's
Yep.
another thing is you don't have to be, and this is something I think is really cool. You don't have to stick to the rules of the
Yeah.
game. If you think something should work differently as a group, then you do that,
Hmm.
which I think is important as teams in general. If you have a certain way of that your team wants to work and every team's unique and you determine that that's good and it works well for you guys, then go and do it. You don't have to necessarily stick to conventions.
Hmm.
So yeah, you don't have to know all the rules
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Hopefully that
to have a
feels
good
like
time.
lower the barrier of entry to people. And that's
Yeah.
interesting you say that because it's something I think about with CMM as well. That, I've been in conversation with people who are maybe new to this theory or just trying to
Mm,
learn it. And maybe in they're talking about their experience of it and their interpretation of it. They're very like apologetic or offering like kind of ways to be like, well, but you know more than me, or but I don't really know it that much. I'm like, no, you do. Like, there's no barrier of entry in terms of like you have to read all the books and then you can say you know CMM. It's, it's in the embodiment, it's in the living of it. And so it's a little messy and it's a little improvisational and learn as you go. But
Yeah.
someone could say, this is my experience of how I'm applying CMM. This is how I, embody a communication perspective. And I'd be like, you're absolutely right. So it's just this idea that there's many ways of being, like I said, and like you're saying in this story, you don't have to know everything ahead of time or, have this plan to be able to play a good game, be a good leader, create a good relationship.
Mm.
And something I want to clarify that language you've used is kind of helping me to articulate is that when I say co-creating a relationship, I think what I really mean is you're co-creating like the space or the tone of the relationship, like kind of visualizing this like
Yeah.
three-dimensional space between us is like the relationship, and it's what kind of tone have we set together in a one-on-one relationship with a family member, a romantic partner, in a group setting with a team at work or with a group of friends who's playing a game like D&D. What kind of tone have we set so that people can show up in this improvisational, maybe what feels a little vulnerable kind of way, but they feel safe to do that. And it's important for me that people understand when we talk about communicating, when we talk about co-creating in our communication, it's not just what you say, but it's in part what you say co-creates that space, but also
Mm.
how we behave and what we normalize together. That
Yeah,
is really
exactly.
what does that work of co-creating, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. There's something as well about something I love about playing the game with new players. And I don't know if you find this with people who are new to the CMM sort of style, is that they come to it with fresh eyes and they're not ingrained in the tropes of the longer term player who think that
Mm-hmm.
they know it all and
Mm-hmm.
they know what sort of traps to look out for or what the optimal thing to do for their character. Newer people coming in are like, yeah, great, and they're still full of enthusiasm and they do
Yes.
things that are completely, you're not expecting, and it's wonderful. It's so good. And
Mm-hmm.
that's also something, you mentioned earlier about playing about the parent child relationship. So I've run games for my children and their friends, and that's another level of
Oh,
creativity. They
yes.
just come up with all sorts of crazy things because they're not constrained by
Yeah.
anything.
Mm.
And it's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing that sort of enthusiasm and imagination that the new players
Mm.
bring to it.
Yes, that imagination piece feels so important. And it's making me think too of language that I've learned from. There's an organization in New York called the East Side Institute, and it's about Fred Newman's social therapeutics. They talk about using this language of kind of performing beyond yourself or performing outside of yourself. And it is all about it's very much related to improv, and it is very much about performance and kind of how we show up to each other and ways of being better and performing our activism and performing in all areas of our lives as like again this like not fake performing but like who do we want to be and what choices are we making. And I just love that language of like performing outside of yourself, and again that being a reminder that that's something we're already doing, like improvising.
Yeah,
It's something we're already doing. They talk about like that's what babies do when they first start talking, is that they don't know understand all the meaning of the words and then choose to say them. They've heard words and so then they're mimicking that, so they're like performing beyond themselves and then eventually kind of like maybe catch up to that. So I just started thinking about that when you told this story about this group with your friend's daughter who had
mm,
this experience from day one to the end of this time 4 years later or whatever, that is able to over time perform outside of yourself enough, but then you start to catch up, so you get to perform kind of further and further ahead in this way that does let you use your imagination and be, I think, really playful in a really important way.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and that playfulness is really important. So you can explore the different avenues of communication or whatever it happens to be. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
definitely.
Do you have a highlight of the campaign you've been running for your children?
Well, something I found really interesting was my son and his friends. So when did I start playing with them? They must have been 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
So when you had the boys together, they were all trying to like mess each other up, push each other in front of the troll. Oh, it was really anarchic. It was unbelievable. And then my daughter and her friends played, and they were much more thoughtful, and they were approaching problems much more just thoughtfully, I suppose, and giving it a thinking a lot. And when the two groups merged, it was really good. The different strengths and played off against each other, and they did really really well. I put some challenges for them, and together they all worked them out. I'll tell you one thing that really made me laugh is there was one room that had a giant scorpion in, and I put this giant scorpion on the table, and everyone's like, oh my gosh. And I was like, here we go. Let's see how they deal with this. And instead of fighting it, they made friends with it. And one of my daughter's friends now has it as a pet, which I didn't foresee coming. So, so they were definitely thinking outside the box. And I was like,
Hmm.
yeah, that's great. That's really good. I'd set this encounter up to be like a challenging combat where I was thinking they were all going to be
Hmm.
running around and supporting each other that way. But instead, they approached it in a completely different way and
Hmm.
yeah, solved the problem and gained an ally at the same time. I was like,
Hmm.
yes, my job is done.
That's sweet. Okay, that makes me think that I am someone that is really, really practicing this idea of emergence because I really,
Mm,
really love to have a plan. And so I'm curious what it's like in as a dungeon master, as a game master, but also, using that metaphorically for other areas of
mm,
life. What is it like for you to have to hold your plan so loosely? Because I imagine that there's maybe like, I don't know, maybe grief is too strong a word, but if you set up this civil war on this island and then they never get to it, or you set up this great battle and then they didn't get to it, like what is that experience like for you in terms of creating a plan and then holding it with open hands and being willing to let it go and be open to something different?
there's a couple of things there. So that one that you talked about, where I'd created that great civil war, it was going to be epic. It's going to be epic. And they went off in a different direction. I did actually feel a bit of grief
Mm-hmm. I
for an
bet.
afternoon. I was like, I was really looking forward to us going down that route. But then I thought about it and I could see how engaged they were and they were really interacting with the world. They weren't just making stuff up, that they wanted to do. They were actually engaging with things that I'd laced into the world or placed into the world. I was like, actually, this is going to work really, really well. So ever since then, now what I do is my planning is much, much looser. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't have an end goal in mind when I'm playing the game. I create factions and how they're interacting with the world, and then the players come in and interact with all of that. There's a couple of advantages here. One is that the players can create a game that they really engage with. It's not my vision, it's our shared vision that is
Yeah,
what
yeah.
comes to pass. The second is it takes a lot less preparation. So when I did my first campaign in this current sort of 5 year, 6 year game that I've been running, I really set it up with a lot of detail, and it took me ages. I mean, it took me hours and hours of planning, and each session I'd really go to town with like
Uh,
drawing maps and all this sort of stuff, which I enjoy. But actually, life's become much much busier now, and I can now start planning sessions in about half an hour. And I can have a rough idea of what's going on. And the other day, I didn't have a time to plan one at all, but I knew how the world was interacting with each other. And when they came in, we just sort of improvised it all off
mhm.
the off as we played. I don't know if the players realized that, but it worked out really, really well.
Yeah.
So it's being able to let go. In my role as a leader, we do have plans and we do have, like I've set, we've set 5 year strategic plans. We've got our annual operational plans, and we know where we're trying to get to. But what I don't do is make it too specific,
Yeah.
because inevitably things are going to change. Market forces are going to come into play. Clients are going to do things that you're not expecting. So you have to be able to roll with it. You know where you want to get to. So for me in my D&D games, my objective is we want to have fun.
Hmm.
So it doesn't matter how we get there, as long as we're having a good time and everyone's enjoying themselves. At work, I know what my objectives are for the year. We want to get there, but how we do it, we've got some themes and how we want to get there, but it's not going to be a prescriptive plan of we're going to do X, Y, and Z. There has to be that opportunity to improvise within it and within those boundaries, I suppose. And I found that really useful, because when things come in from left field, like a client goes bankrupt or something, that's okay. that's, you just have to reform that part of the
Hmm.
plan, and you sort of roll with it as a team, and work out other ways to make it happen. And it gives you that space to be able to improvise and change and react and adapt, which is what you have to
Hmm.
do. You have to be able to adapt in the real
Hmm.
world.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
running emergent games definitely sets you up for that. With the emergent side of it, so I'm setting up a new campaign. I started over the weekend. It's like a sort of based on Knights of the Round Table type thing. But instead of setting a long plot, I'm creating it as a sandbox where you create a map and different kingdoms and people and threats and all sorts of things. And then rather than having a preconceived idea of how it's going to work, I'm just going to let the players loose on it and let's see
Hmm.
what happens.
Hmm.
And the cool thing there is, like I said before, they get to create the story that they enjoy. But for me, as running the game, I don't know what's going to happen either. So it's just as exciting for me.
Yep.
So,
Yes.
we're all into that. We're all engaged. We're all excited. And it also means, and this is important, is that the decisions that they make in the game can have a really massive impact on the
Yes.
story. So if if this is what happened in one of our games, one character decides to buy a theater and start putting on theater productions, that's going to have an impact on the story. So their plays then start permeating out into
Hmm.
the rest of the fantasy world. And even so, the way I've run it is my campaigns will finish after a year and a half, and then we move the story on 50 years.
Mm.
And so plays and things that were created back in that sort of,
Yeah.
going to create a theater, those plays have permeated throughout the fantasy world, and
Hmm.
then they get bumped into later on 50 years down the
Hmm.
track. So you want people's decisions to have those sorts of impacts,
Yes.
and then it makes it really engaging because they know they're really influencing the shared world.
Hmm. Hmm. I think this idea of a sandbox, again, it's just also applicable. Like,
Mm,
and that's language that I feel like I could adopt for these podcast conversations. Like, I want it to be a sandbox. And so I've had kind of a parallel in some ways experience to what you've
mm,
just described of I used to do a ton of planning for these podcast episodes, just like loads of questions that we could never possibly get to. But I was so focused on trying to kind of control it. And I've kind of over time become a lot more open to the emergence of the conversation. So I sent you a handful of questions. I haven't asked any of those word for word today. We're kind of around these ideas that we talked about ahead of time that we would, and that's kind of the sandbox.
mm.
Or another language that I found really useful from people I work with that talk about improvisation and communication. And I think maybe more specifically, like musical improvisation, like jazz
Yeah,
improvisation, is this idea of minimal structure, which goes hand in hand with the improvisation, is say, what minimal structure can we set up? Not so much that it's, a barrier to us or, keeping us from being imaginative, but just enough that within which we can improvise well. And I just think that's such a great idea. And the language that's coming to my mind from a conversation I had earlier this year on the podcast with Karina Solso is she offered me the distinction between planning and preparing. And
mm,
both are important things. Like you said, in your job, there are plans, there have to be plans. But also, I think what we're doing, what the stories that we've both described, me with my podcast, you with how you approach your D&D games now, is a lot more about being prepared than it is about having a plan.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's that having preparation so you know the context, and then if you rather than a step-by-step plan, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. It's that, yeah, it's preparing to create it so you can create the
Yeah.
space
Yeah. Like
for
prepare to
everyone
be
else.
improvisational, prepare
Yes,
to
exactly.
lean into the mystery, the emergence of it, the things you can't control. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. One thing I find really interesting with games of these sorts is you can really do different things with them.
Mm-hmm.
So my friends and I have played all sorts of different one shots. So we've got our campaigns, which are, your characters are progressing,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got that shared campaign, and the world evolves around the players. You can also do really interesting one shots where you play in one session.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had things. So that one again, I keep coming back to that mutiny, but so that was one like that. But there's another one. A friend of mine does these great ones where you get given a random character and you're in like a
Mm,
situation. Like you've been shipwrecked on an island or something. And what he does is he sets the characters up to actually have conflict. So you don't know who you're going to be
mm,
trusting. And that can be really fun to really put yourself in a different situation. And explore different things. So rather than collaboration, sometimes you can explore the opposite of that, but in a
mm-hmm.
fun way.
Yes.
Without people getting upset or anything. So I think there's lots there's lots of dimensions that
Yeah.
you can sort of play with. Perhaps that there are different factions that play within the player base, and you're all
Mm-hmm.
trying to negotiate that. Yeah, so there's lots of fun to be had with games like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. The other element of this that I think is relevant for people, again, whether or not they play D&D in their whole lifetime, I think there's plenty to learn here. And I want to make sure I mention this before we wrap up because I'm curious your
Mm,
thoughts on it, or that something else that's been on my mind as I've been just kind of reflecting on D&D through a CMM lens, is to reference one of the first show that I watched of someone playing D&D. You've got these different character types. You have, this is getting into the language, so it might not mean a lot for
mm,
everyone, but you've got a bard, and you've got a barbarian, and you've got a rogue, and you've got a wizard. And so all of these different character types have different skill sets. You've got a cleric. And it's interesting, I think, again, the practice, or in my situation of kind of watching this happen, the kind of collective learning that you see happen as the characters understand how to work with each other's strengths. And so, just as an example, this first show that I watched, one of the players was brand new. This was their first game
mm.
of D&D ever, and they're the cleric, and they're running into the battle getting killed immediately, and the other players are kind of like, no, you have to hold back because you're the one that heals us when we die. Like, you're not the barbarian who's got the crazy strength or the high shield, like this element of like playing to your strengths. And it's not that clear cut, of course, in regular
Mm,
life, but I think it does say something really interesting about different people's strengths individually, but maybe more
mm.
importantly, how our skill sets, our, I don't know, proclivities, interests, passions interact with each other. Again, it's all relational. It's not an individual, it's a group, and it's this group dynamic. And how do we learn as we go? And so, again, it's not as clear cut as, you're this role, you're this role, you're this role. And everybody does their own role. But in real life, I think it does say something interesting about leadership that is more of a word that I would use is like a heterarchy as opposed to a hierarchy. It's much more fluid. It's much more flexible,
Mm.
that in a different moment, we might need this person to step to the front. We might need to, rely on this person a little more in this different scenario. And so I hope that is, not I hope, but I think that can be important for expanding people's understanding of what leadership is and what it looks like in a group, and help people to get out of this kind of narrow way of thinking, which is, here's one person at the top of the triangle, that person leads these people. But how is this a lot more relational and a lot more
Yeah.
collaborative, and still call it leadership?
And I've seen that in my own games
Mm-hmm.
actually recently. So the people I play with on a fortnightly basis, they take the lead. So they don't have a set party leader, which is great. I don't like it when there's a set
Mm-hmm.
party leader. I
Mm-hmm.
think it has to be shared in a game like this to make it fun. If you've got someone
Yes.
dictating everything or trying to take over, it doesn't really work. But they take the lead at different times. So depending on the situation, they were being chased in these sort of floating sky yachts. Um, One person took the lead in steering the ship. Another one was like, right, I know what I'm going to do, and they're slinging fireballs off the back.
Mm-hmm.
The other ones are trying to create more wind. They're all like running around, and they're all taking the lead in different
Yes.
elements of
Yes.
it. Or you've got a particular scene comes up. One will say, I'll take the lead on this, and starts, running it. Or they say, actually, maybe you should take the lead on this to one of the, and then they're like, oh no, I don't know if I want to. It's like, well, you've got the right skills for this.
Yes.
And then they work together as a group. Yeah, which I think is really powerful. You're right. You're right. And that's the way it should work in the real world too. When you've got a team of people who are performing well together, you
Mm-hmm.
should recognize who's good at what, maybe what someone's better at at communicating with clients so they can take the lead
Mm-hmm.
on that, whatever it happens to be. And I try and do that in my job because I know in my role, I'm not a technical expert. The people who work for me are technical experts. So I have to then facilitate the work that they do and how they can then, get outcomes for our clients. It's not, I can't, if I try to do everything myself, I would fail.
Mm-hmm.
I have to lean on the skills of everybody else, and we have to include everyone and play to their strengths. And that is a core part of being a leader. But some people forget that and they try and do it all
Yes.
themselves. And if you
Yes.
do that in the game, you're going to fail. If you do that in real life, it's not going to go well for you. So yeah, the parallels are great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Tom, I think there's so much here. We could probably keep talking forever, but as we
Mm,
wrap up, I want to kind of throw it back to you to say, what else? What have we
mm,
not talked about yet that you want to share, or what do you want to leave us with? What story? Maybe I love a story. That's where I like to end. What would you
yeah.
like to leave us with today?
I think Dungeons and Dragons I mean, there's such a resurgence. I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
really powerful tool, like we're talking about for leadership and everything, but it's also just so much fun.
Yes.
Some of my best friends now are people I met maybe 10 years ago because I decided to take the plunge and join a group.
Mm-hmm.
And two people in particular joined at the same time as me, doing exactly the same thing. And
Mm-hmm.
now they're two of my closest friends, and they're really good fun, and they're so creative. And I don't know if I would have met them
Mm-hmm.
if it hadn't been for the game. So I think there's a huge social impact there by playing a game with people around the table. It's like a physical thing. Actually interacting with real people in a real space. I think there's a lot to be said for that. So the work stuff aside, I think the social side of it, making friends and doing something that's not on a screen
Mm-hmm.
is, I think the valuable is it's so valuable that you just can't. Yeah, I don't think you can even put a number to it.
Mm-hmm. Tom, I'm so glad that you just said that, because I'm kind of zooming out on myself and being like, wow,
Mm,
this has been a great conversation, but I think I've been approaching it a little narrowly, which it still is important, but think about your whole thing is D&D at work. And that is so
mm,
important. But also I think everything we've said is not exclusive to work. And it's just
mm,
as important to practice these kind of things like collaboration, like coordination and storytelling and shared meaning making. That happens just as much and is just important in our outside of work relationships and worlds. And, it's still worth being thoughtful in those spaces and practicing in those. People don't think about that. Everybody talks about professional development, and that's a big market, but what
mm.
about this personal development? And so I think this is a great kind of intersection of those two things that, yes, like we've talked about today, there's a lot of great applications for what leadership looks like, what relationships look like at work, but it's also just as applicable to every area outside of that, and has just, yeah, its own intrinsic social value, like you said. So thank you for bringing us back to that.
No, that's great. Perfect.
Thanks so much, Tom. This has been such a great conversation, and I feel like there's so much more to say, but I'm really appreciative of your time and your perspective today. And like I said, and I think this is true, maybe more so than others for this conversation, but it's true in many of my conversations that, whatever kind of expertise or experience my guest has, it's not, always going to be exactly what everyone listening shares that experience. And I think that's okay. The point is not to just learn from people who have the same experiences as you. And so I feel excited to share this, and hopefully to, ask people with us to kind of perform outside of themselves or use their imagination to think about this thing that maybe they don't have experience with, maybe they want to have experience with, and people, will maybe want to get into that. But yeah, I just really appreciate your perspective, and putting this all in terms of a communication perspective, and where I'd like to end the idea of better social worlds. And I think I hope, made it very clear today, this, practicing and this opportunity that D&D offers us is certainly a part of particularly equipping us to create our better social world. So thanks so much, Tom.
No, thank you. That's been fantastic. Thanks.
Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. First, you're always welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections, questions, and ideas. There are also a number of online spaces where you can comment, including the Stories Lived, Stories Told Instagram and the CMM Institute Substack. Links to all these places to connect are in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date, a couple things you can do are follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to get every episode right in your inbox. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives, including our other podcast, Cosmo Parenting, and all our free Cosmo activities, as well as Cosmopolis 2045. There's also the CMM Institute Fellowship and the CMM Institute Press. We have so many great resources that we are so excited to share. Again, links to all of that can be found in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.